everybody, welcome to another episode of Inside Tabletop. This is my ongoing show where I'm joined by people from inside the industry to talk about things happening in this industry and sort of like share some inside knowledge on people who've worked in here. Last week we sat down with Chris from Woods War Games and Hobbies and talked about introductory products. Had a very stirring conversation about that. And this week I'm actually alone. And the reason I'm alone is it's on theme for the topic of the day, which was spurred into my mind actually by an article on Warhammer Community about solo and cooperative gaming in the new edition of Kill Team 2024 and how it was an add-on to the game. And I find it very interesting. The Joint Operations Pack is being given all this time and attention. And I thought I would do a bit about why I think. There's three reasons why. I think this is actually a really important element in tabletop gaming. And it actually has been growing exponentially. And I am completely surrounded right now by what I think are some of the top solo and cooperative game experiences you can have on the market today in a variety of different genres. I tried to do like 3 from every kind of genre I could think of and pull from a bunch of different areas. And you're probably gonna hear some familiar names. And there's multiple games here under some designers' names too. So like we're getting crazy with like the options you guys can have. But this is something that's pretty near and dear to my heart. It became really important, I think, and obvious that this was something that people were interested in during the pandemic. And that was because a lot more people spent a lot of time hobbying and didn't have an opportunity to hobby with their friends and family, or if they were during lockdown, if they were hobbying with family members, they might be teaching them to experience the tabletop hobby for the first time. And let's dive in then and talk about the 3 reasons. Before I start vetting each of these things, I'm going to pull these up and talk about them, so it's going to be long. The preamble I wanted to kind of give some criteria for why I think it's so important that these games exist. Some history. So first of all, these games have been around for a long time. In fact, going all the way back to the 80s, when this was a much smaller industry, this was actually a logo that would go on Games Workshop products. This is Advanced HeroQuest. It was a version of HeroQuest that was a lot more Warhammery. It used Warhammer miniatures. It was made in-house by Games Workshop as opposed to in partnership with Milton Bradley, which was the original version of HeroQuest. And it had right here, includes full rules for solo play. It was something that designers back then thought were really important because this was a much smaller industry. I can attest that between 1988, when I discovered this back here, probably one of the best and first solo RPG things that you could have, also made by the founders of Games Workshop, by Ian Livingston and Steve Jackson. This is The Warlock of Firetop Mountain. And Steve Jackson's Sorcery, lovingly cover illustrated by John Blanche. The whole thing is by John Blanche, actually, these books. You didn't necessarily have the opportunity to meet people that were even aware that this was a hobby. It was just a much smaller industry. And so having opportunities to experience, for anyone to experience it without the barrier of having to know or convince someone else who might not be into it to play the game, was massive. It was just a huge, like a widening of the on-ramp, basically, for people to be able to experience the gameplay loop. And that brings me to thing number 1. And there's other games that are classics in here, but I'm going to go through when I talk about some of these, because some of them are not available, but some of them are available for free. So just kind of the history lesson. These have been around for a long time, almost 40 years. I just think it's kind of important. So thing number 1 is that solo gameplay and cooperative gameplay experiences remove the barrier from you completing the gameplay loop. So that when you try a game, if you can play it competitively head to head, but you can also play it with someone else against the game or by yourself against the game, if those are options inside the game, there's nothing stopping you from finishing the full completion of whatever the game is, of like the build, paint, play steps. That's a really, really good option for having someone learn the rules before they play against people for the first time and also feel comfortable with their purchase. So having this as something in the new Kill Team 2024, I thought was a really interesting choice because there's no, like, it doesn't have to occupy a ton of the game space, but having joint operations be something they're talking about in Warhammer Community as being important, being something they've added, shows some awareness of this fact that you're just for nothing, like there's no downside to this. You're just widening the chance that someone who buys it for the first time or interacts with it for the first time gets to complete the loop, because they can do it by themselves now. There's no barrier to having to have someone else to do it with. Number 2, the cooperative part of it, the joint operations cooperative part of it, allows you to teach someone a game without an adversarial component. And this is probably something that anyone who's ever tried to get a friend, a family member, a partner into tabletop gaming with has probably struggled with and encountered. You can have a really hard time not winning or losing too hard. And either of those things can be a problem. When you demonstrate a game and you're in a head-to-head situation, your instinct is to try and win, but your opponent also needs to feel some tension that they might lose to have the whole fun experience of their victory even mattering, right? So by removing yourself as an opponent, by teaching someone to play the game cooperatively, where it's you against the game, you and them against the game, you have to fake it. It's the best way to demonstrate any gameplay to somebody is by sitting in the co-pilot seat with them and just driving the vehicle, right? Like you get to do it together against the game. So they never feel like you're talking down to them, and they also never feel overwhelmed by you having too much knowledge. You're just helping them make informed choices while you're making informed choices at the same time. It's such a healthier way to learn rules. And the more games it can be included in, where there's some component where you play against the game, even if it's just like the tutorial mission, or you provide some kind of like 3-mission tutorial pack inside tabletop games, you will get a much bigger return on people enjoying that first time, right? Because there will be memorable moments. The gameplay, if it's, as long as the gameplay is curated, like in an introductory product or in such a way that it's fairly balanced, you're going to have a good time, because you're going to figure out, how to beat the computer, how to beat the AI of the system together. And you feel like you have been going through something together rather than having something done to you or being overwhelmed by someone having more knowledge than you, which is, I think, super important. And then 3, it means that your hobby never goes away. It means that if you enjoy a game system, you can literally play it forever. If the game ends, if it is discontinued, if products go away, it's just complete at that point. And you can have that experience as many times as you want, because the number one thing that makes games fade completely into oblivion is a lack of people to play it with. If I have to have a whole collection of miniatures and also find someone else that's still interested in this thing that gets no new releases and never is talked about, and you can't, impress your friends by being the best at, then I'm eventually going to lose interest in it. But if I can play against the computer forever, it can always be a thing you break out and teach friends, because they don't need to show up with anything. If you have the game and it's a solo and cooperative experience, you can just play. There's a reason why lots of solo and cooperative board games are so evergreen and so popular. Things like Betrayal at House on the Hill, I think it's in its like 5th or 6th edition now. Like, these are just really popular gameplay loops, and they only require one person to have the thing. And if that game gets discontinued, people will still play it forever, because it's just a fun way to spend some time. And doesn't need anything extra outside that box. There's a reason why I can still play, even though it's been discontinued forever, one of the greatest Games Workshop games of all time, which is Space Hulk. And this has been emulated many times by many companies. This is one of the OG, along with Advanced Hero Quest, solo play rule sets that Games Workshop ever produced. So it's not like they've never done this before. And it's certainly not like they don't understand the benefits. I think that what happened, though, is for a long time, the design team was not around when that happened and had never experienced it. So I think when you have a changing of the guard where like designers come and go and they leave and the old guard leaves and a new guard comes in, they import their experience. And I think the older crowd had, in the beginning, an understanding of how small the community was and how important having a solo or cooperative game experience might be to certain games, to allow it to be taught, to allow it to be evergreen and be around for a long time, and to allow it to be a less competitive, more rewarding system where two people can have an enjoyable experience together against a soulless AI that you don't have to feel bad about beating you or feel bad about winning. And they have made other games in recent times. So I'm going to go quickly through some of the Games Workshop classics. Obviously, Space Hulk, Advanced Hero Quest are complete classics. One of my favorites of all time would be the 90s version of Warhammer Quest, but the modern Quest games, all of these are solo and cooperative. It started with this, which is James Hewitt's Silver Tower, and he most recently made Fallout Nuka World, Fallout Tactics Nuka World, or Fallout Factions Nuka World, sorry, from Modifius. He also made Titanicus and a couple other recent games, but this was, I think, his first thing he did for Workshop. And is very much based on this, is very much based on the DNA of old adventure books like this, where you get to go to paragraphs and read what's happening to you. And this spawned all of the later games. So if you've played Cursed City or Warhammer Quest, Blackstone Fortress, the 40K version, these are great solo and cooperative games. If you have them in your collection, I honestly think they're gonna be fun forever, because the models are all great and the gameplay loop is fun and exciting. That takes us all the way to like the Space Hulk in 2009, which I'm currently redoing. I'm not gonna reach over and grab it over there, but Workshop is definitely well and truly familiar with this. And these games all tend to hit these three criteria, which I think is super important. And then let's talk about some other games. So modern equivalents of what I just showed you. Well, here's a great example of one. And that would be the new Hero Quests. This is a most recent expansion. This is Against the Ogre Horde for the Hero Quest new edition, which was done by Hasbro and Avalon Hill. This is an expansion pack with like a full quest that you can play through, a standalone quest where you're going into like an ogre fortress basically to kill their king. But all of these new game sets have an app, a Zargon app, that removes the need to have a dungeon master, to have basically an extra player, and means that you can play the game by yourself. You can just take 4 heroes and play through the entire adventure, and the monsters will move. You just load up the adventure, and the monsters will move based on where your heroes' positions are and attack you. And you don't have to do anything for the monsters. You just move them around. The app does all the work for you, which I think is a really interesting expansion for this. And then we got this, and this is another modern classic. We got Aliens, Another Glorious Day in the Core by Gale Force 9. This is, I think, super relevant right now with Alien, which we call Romulus having just come out. Obviously this franchise has got some interest in it. And it is a modern version of Space Hulk. So if you guys are looking for an equivalent experience to something like old Warhammer Quest or Space Hulk, these are on the market right now, right? You can grab Hero Quest, you can grab the new edition of Hero Quest, the app's free. You can grab Another Glorious Day in the Core from Gale Force 9 and get an equivalent experience to that Aliens versus Marines, Space Hulk was obviously a riff on the movie Aliens. Like there's no doubt that was kind of what was trying to be captured there in the 40K universe. This is back when everything in 40K was an in-joke. But those are two great modern games that you can get right now that have that solo and co-op game experience. Other great titles we have, of course, I would say probably one of, if this was coming back into popularity a few years ago, one of the authors that definitely is responsible for its success would be Joe McCullough with Rangers of Shadow Deep. This is an adventure game, much like an RPG. It has episodic content that's all bespoke and written by Joe, where you will go on adventures and you are trying to hold back the Shadow Deep, which is slowly but surely enveloping the Kingdom of Alador. Your Rangers working for the King of Alador, and you venture into the Shadow Deep to try and slow it down. It's got character creation. You have a little warband of heroes. You're kind of making your own little Fellowship of the Ring. He also penned solo rules for the Silver Bayonet. Now, this is a better example of what I'm talking about, where you have an adversarial head-to-head game. Rangers of the Shadow Deep is fully solo and cooperative. Like you can play with multiple players, but you're always playing against the game. Silver Bayonet is an adversarial head-to-head game of like horror hunting in Napoleonic War times, but they've got solo rules baked in. So there's separate solo campaigns and head-to-head campaigns in each of the expansions. I wrote one for the Canada expansion for this game, set in North America around the War of 1812, and the classic one in here also. There's the Carpathian one that has you hunting vampires and all that stuff. So Joe is, I would say, one of the modern modern sort of like Renaissance guys when it comes to these indie games that are solo and cooperative. We've also got Kev over at KRD Designs. He has a plethora of these games, which can be just like Silver Bayonet, played head-to-head, solo cooperative. The first one, Forbidden Song, based on the popular RPG Morkborg. But he also has a World War I Trench War, The Last War, which is in a similar vein, and then a Gaslight one called Dread Knights. There's tons of expanded content to it for like this. We've got the Collection of Death. He's got a cyborg one called Kill Process Protocol, which is more of like a dark hardware sort of 2000 AD one. Tons of extra content for these. These are kit bash games, so you can like procedurally generate a warband, convert and kit bash it whatever you want, and then have this like really wonderful 2x2 kitchen table skirmish where all of the missions are done episodically. I also wrote some content for these, so if you've got the new edition of Forbidden Psalm on order, I think he folded it in the Footsteps of the Mad Wizard, which I think has some stuff by me in it. Actually, my buddy Shane too wrote some stuff in there. Then we've got Warlord Descendant from Black Oath Games. This is another skirmish style game, a little more warbandy, like Mordheim style, and it's set in kind of a no man's land. There's this sort of semi-European, almost like Spanish Inquisition era sort of like continent. It's not a continent, it's more like an island, like a large, like almost like island of Britain sort of thing. And these various sort of nations and factions are fighting through no man's land. It's very dark Soulsy. If you like that sort of like FromSoft style, I would say that this is for you. Again, it's a kit bash style game. The bad guys are all in that sort of like dark sort of theme. This would be a great game to play actually with the board game pieces from the Dark Souls game that came out from, I think it was, who did Dark Souls? Was it Steamforged, I think, did Dark Souls? Yeah, they do all the video game stuff. Anyway, lots of expansions for this too. This one is the, what's this one called? It's the zine. It's called Nemesis, I think, or Mnemonic. I can't read that ancient writing. Demonic, the official Sacrifice zine for Warlord Descendants. So you can get all kinds of extra stuff. And he has Sacrifice, which is an RPG that ties into this. So this is kind of like the skirmish game that goes with that. It uses a really cool board setup process where you have these 8.5 by 11 tiles that you fill up, and I'm in the process of making some that I can play through. In mainstream terms, of the two things they've published sort of so far that I think has the best solo play rules, the Elder Scrolls: A Call to Arms from Modiphius has something called Delves, and Delves in solo play are literally a dungeon from Elder Scrolls. So you enter the dungeon, it tends to have episodes or levels almost that you go through. It's got bespoke bad guys in it, and you usually fight a boss at the end. If you're looking for probably the best miniature adaptation of a video game that's solo and cooperative, I would say this Call to Arms is probably the best. It's a bit component heavy, but you can get the starter set box, and then you get the delve boxes or the components for the delve boxes separately, and you can play a lot of really fun adventures in like a mainstream sort of like IP driven thing. As far as other fantasy games go, probably the hero that everyone needed but didn't know they needed when the pandemic came, and because these became very popular, these journaling games, is going to be the I guess they're called 5 Core is the whole series. We have 5 Leaves in Borderlands, and we have also 5 Parsecs from Home, which is the science fiction version. And these are Nordic Weasel Games' very excellent sort of like procedurally generated and use any minis you want games. My favorite part about Borderlands, for instance, is that you start off by drawing a map, any kind of map you want, map of a cool area that you want to explore, and then you start adding locations to it, and new locations get added as your warband travels on and encounters bad guys. There's lists of tons of bad guys that can populate it. Your region would have a certain group of them. You'd have like large populations of some, smaller populations of others, and you're slowly pushing the population down, their control values down until you've cleared the area and kind of like finished the quest. It's really well done. If you're looking to like have a DM-less or like arbitrator-less skirmish campaign, and it's all solo play, you could do it cooperatively just by splitting your warband up, but like this is one of the best, I think, of this type of game. And 5 Parsecs in the Sci-Fi version is also fantastic. So Ivan Soren, he's done a bang-up job writing these things. They're super popular. There's also World War II versions. I think he's got like 30 plus titles now on Drive-Thru RPG for these games. And these lovely hardcovers for 5 Parsecs and for 5 Leagues are available from Modiphius from their website. If you're looking for a extremely modern and bespoke version of the classic 97 Hero Quest, the League of Dungeoneers is, I would say, probably the most classic retelling of this. This is the hardcover rulebook. There's also a big box with all of the classic cardboard dungeon tiles, like in 97 Warhammer Quest. And you get a ton of detail. If you loved the role play book from Classic Hero Quest. This right here will offer you hours and hours and hours of detail to delve through and have classic adventures. We've also got it's, I guess, like classic duo of Adam and Vince over at Starling Badger Games doing their solo content. So Death Wish is the most recent one. But they also had Space Station Zero, which was also a solo play game that you could play through in the science fiction vein. This one is about being an evil wizard. The other one is about being trapped, I'm trying to think of like a good movie parallel. Being trapped in like a megaplex, like a giant space station at the edge of the universe that your spaceship has jumped to by accident. There was a Love, Death, and Robots that was kind of like that with weird bug creatures. The Super Sexy Time one. It's kind of like that, except the space station isn't sexy. It's full of weird AIs and you're trapped there and you're trying to figure out how to get home. And then last but not least, probably some of my favorites of the last 10 years. These are written by Matt Burns and they are the Don't Look Back series of games. This is a horror slasher game. If you're looking for a great cooperative game, especially for horror fans around Halloween, Don't Look Back is maybe the most fun you can have around a gaming table, running from an evil killer that you can barely stop and trying to get away while being sexy teens, because it's an 80s slasher movie, or being like, you know, kind of a dumpy security guard or a park ranger or something like that. It's just coming in a beautiful new hardcover edition. But also a lot of solo and co-op party games from the same designers and from Black Site Studios are the Zen Games. Like The Chase, this is the one where it's basically, what if you had, Twisters be a miniature game? There's STLs you can print of all of those things. You want to have did you really need, we all need a Helen Hunt and what's his name? And Hudson from Aliens. Oh shoot, I've lost it. We need those miniatures basically, we all do. There's no one doesn't need that in their collection. But there's also an evil possessed bed and breakfast, several other fun sort of like solo and cooperative games in that little $5 zine format that you can grab off the Black Site Studios website or when you see them at conventions. And then last but not least, because these are all in reprint right now, it's not miniature gaming related, but you could use miniatures in the RPG part of it or for the comp part of it. Any of the fighting fantasy books, these are these are written by the original founders of Games Workshop, Ian Livingston, Steve Jackson, and are probably the most fun you can have with 2 dice, a pencil, and eraser, if you're looking for like a fun RPG that you can dive into. So suffice it to say, solo and cooperative gaming is nothing new. It provides, I think, a kind of key social experience that we're really lacking in wargaming right now. Just to kind of finish off this little essay, I think that there is way too much emphasis placed on balance and fairness and competitive gaming right now in tabletop, and far less emphasis placed on the experience that 2 people can have with a game. If you want to be surprised and delighted by a game, have 2 people fight the game. And I think you can make good content that provides that. I think Games Workshop's selling out of things like Curse City, obviously the restock stuff and the drama there, that's a whole other story. But Blackstone Fortress always sold out. All of their Quest games up until now have been great for them. They've never lingered. They never stayed in stock. People who've gotten them have enjoyed them. There's still groups talking about Quest 97 like forever. You know what I mean? Like that's a forever ago game and people are still playing it, talking about how great it was. And they're still being made. There's still a market for them. There's still actively designers out there going, hey, look at what we can do to make an experience that isn't you versus me, it's us versus the game. And that makes you want to come back and play it more. That means you complete the loop more, and that means the satisfaction of completing the loop is there, right? Because you and your friends outsmarted the game. It's like solving a puzzle, it's like doing an escape room, and no one ever has a bad time because no one was going head to head. Everyone was trying to cooperate to get the job done. I think there's nothing but net positive for it. I'm really excited that this is something the workshop is adding back into their skirmish games, because I think their skirmish games in particular are where this would really shine. I don't know how you would bring it into the big battle games, but I think you could. And I think there could be more. I think you could write scenarios for almost every game out there today that are cooperative at the very least, like a last stand mission, right? Where 2 players command 2 allied forces against an infinite horde of bad guys. You could do that. That's absolutely a thing you could write for any of the head-to-head current games. I think that the thing is that people don't think there's an appetite for it. And so slowly reintroducing it into things like Kill Team, I think is probably a good idea. just to prove that the appetite's there, and then just make content for it. Make more things. Make fun missions to go on. Make these little D&D adventures with miniatures that people can play through and have a good time doing. And it's like inserting another game into an Xbox, right? Every time you release this as an idea, if you make a mission pack where it's, you and me against the game, I think I'm more likely to play it than I am if it's you and me against each other, because no one's going to feel bad. Everyone's going to have a good time. At the end of the day, all the toys go back in the box and you get to play them again anytime you want. So there it is. Inside Tabletop about solo, some of the history of solo and cooperative games, why I think they're a great idea, and why I think that this trend should definitely continue, and a whole bunch of stuff for you guys to dig into and check out that hopefully will ignite your interest in this kind of hobby. So thanks for watching. We'll see you for more Inside Tabletop. Till next time, I'm Ash. Have a great day. Thanks for checking out another episode of Inside Tabletop. If you have a favorite solo or cooperative tabletop game that you think I didn't mention in this episode, please tell us in the comments and let us know what you're most excited about these joint operations and the potential for design that they might show inside the new Kill Team 2024. Thank you most of all to my wonderful patrons who make this show possible and get it as a special patrons only podcast, usually 2 to 3 days early in the patrons only podcast stream. Thanks again, and have a great day.